Drug Evaluation and Research Small Business and Industry Assistance Program, also known as CDER SBIA. Our webinar today provides information on the plans, progress, and technical specifications on enhancements to electronic submissions of pre-market and post-market individual case safety reports and FAERS using ICH E2B R3 standards. This webinar will enhance the pharmaceutical industry's knowledge of the processes needed to implement ICH E2B R3 into their systems. The webinar will be posted in its entirety, both video and audio, on our website within 5 business days. And that website is fda.gov/CDER webinars. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some detail. Slides for today's presentation are available from the right-hand side of your screen where the orange button says Download the Presentation. This activity is eligible for 1 unit of CME, CNE, and CPE. After the webinar, you'll receive a separate email providing you with instructions and completion codes. This activity is also eligible for continuing education by SOCRA, RAPS, SQA, and ACRP. Please refer to our website at fda.gov/CDER for more details. You'll be able to obtain the attendance certificate only upon completion of the survey, which will remain open for 2 weeks. That means it will close on October 24th. Even if you don't need the certificate, we'd appreciate it if you let us know your comments and feedback via the survey. To outline today's event, the webinar in its entirety will run approximately 1 hour, which includes a Q&A session. Now for our CE statement. This event will offer 1 continuing education unit for physicians, pharmacists, and nurses. I want to take a moment to share some housekeeping about the CE. All faculty are expected to use generic names. If trade names are used, those of several companies should be used rather than those of only a single supporting company. CE faculty are required to disclose to the attendees when products or procedures being discussed are off-label or unlabeled, and any limitations on the information that is presented. Our speaker, planning committee, and CE team have no conflicts of interest to disclose. After this webinar concludes, instructions on how to claim your CE in continuing education will be sent to you via email from cedersbia@fda.hhs.gov. Please note, you have 14 days to claim your CE and attest to your attendance. Our speaker for today's presentation is Suranjan Day, MS MBA, Deputy Director, Regulatory Science Staff, Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology, CDER. Welcome, Suranjan.
Thank you. So today's webinar is about electronic submission of adverse event reports to the FDA FAERS using the ICH E2B R3 standard. I'm Suranjan Day. This particular webinar had some prerequisite which was posted on the webinar's website or the FDA's website, and these prerequisites were the 2 meetings that was held, one in March of 2019. The presentation slides are there and the webcast for that particular presentation, and July 17, 2019, the presentation slides are there and the webcast is listed there. The reason why we had put this, because there's a lot of information that was discussed on those 2 meetings. They were 8-hour meetings, and we are summarizing many of them today, and in addition to that, providing our updates after we got comments from these 2 meetings. So today's agenda. So we're going to talk about FAERS II E2B R3 up-versioning plan, the E2B R3 Regional Elements, updates on the electronic submission routing mechanisms, and then the testing of those ICH E2B R3 Regional XML files. So let's go and dive into the FAERS II and E2B R3 up-versioning plans. So FAERS II. So our FAERS II objective was that it's a very mission critical system for FDA, and just for everyone who probably have not attended those two EPROM meetings we have had, it's a modernized system for pre-market and post-market along with product quality. It's a one-stop shop for all intake, triage, and case processing, and it will allow us for enhanced unified data analytics and signal management. Another objective is that we have to be compliant with the ICH E2B R3 data standards. And then, of course, this tool, the old tools have to be decommissioned because of security risks, and this has been designated as a modernization priority for Health and Human Services. Getting into the scope, this is implementing and maintenance of the COTS pharmacovigilance software and the operations and maintenance of the implemented tool, which goes all the way from initiation to deployment. And of course, we are decommissioning some of the old tools that we use for our case processing and our safety database. What are the tools we are going to be implementing? We have for data analytics and signal management, we have a tool from RxLogic called PV Signal and PV Report. And for case processing, we have the ARIS Global LifeSphere set of tools. All right, I think we're back again. So moving forward, the tools that we are using for our new FAERS II for data analytics and signal management are RxLogic. We're using two tools, PV Signal and PV Reports. And for case processing, we have the ARIS Global LifeSphere suite of tools. Now here comes the most interesting slide, which is the FAERS E2B R3 Roadmap. Again, note that these are tentative timelines. We are working towards this. So the key items to or the elements to see here is the FDA E2B R3 core and regional elements that we are updating to finalize. We have almost finalized this. I think after this meeting, we will be able to publish that core list of data elements. What we're going to go over today. We had two public meeting. Our third public meeting is the final public meeting is in February. So I'll encourage all of you to attend that meeting. The updated technical specification document, we plan to publish that sometime in March. And we are going to also have a URL available for validating your XML. As you all know that today, if you have to validate your XML, you have to send us 10 XMLs and we validate it. But we're going to have a website, a UI based, where you can go and upload your file and test your validations. And probably after March of 2020, this site will be available for you to go and test. The question is, when I say March 2020, is that when you have to start submitting your XMLs? And the answer is no. There is no date that has been decided or posted where you have to submit your XMLs in R3. So you could still continue with R2, and FDA is still going to support the current and the previous versions. Also for IND safety reporting in R2, this is one line you'll see at the end. We have still are working on that. We had some pilots which were done, and we have a tentative for voluntary submission of SRP through SRP or through the E2B route. So we still not put in a timeline, but whenever it gets published and the timelines comes out, typically it's a 2-year process from that point onwards. All right. So for the IND requirements timelines, we have, with IND, you can submit through the gateway, or you can use the safety reporting portal, depending upon, but you cannot use both. If you have moved to safety gateway, you have moved to gateway, so you're no longer connected to the safety reporting portal. So many of the sponsors we have seen probably started with the safety reporting portal and moved on to the gateway. And then it will be, again, as I said, 24 months from the after the publication and notification of the guidance. Hopefully, voluntarily, we think that, I mean, our goal is if you can do it sometime by Q1 of 2020. But again, this is a very tentative timeline which we have. All right. So going over some of the items we had for meeting 1, I just want to summarize them. Hopefully, you all have reviewed the videos and the slides. So session 1, I had talked about E2B R3 versioning plans. We had a session on electronic submission of IND safety reporting. So this is another whole you will see in the video. You would be able to see Meredith speaking about that. We had electronic submission of post-market safety reporting. So what are the regional elements for post-market? And then we talked about updates on electronic submission routing mechanisms, and this is how reports are routed, and having 2 separate routing mechanisms for pre and post was discussed in there. When we went to meeting number 2 in July, we did a synopsis of the first meeting. We talked about the E2B R3 Regional for pre-market. We talked about generic drugs with BA/BE trials. This was another type of reports that we are planning on implementing in FAERS II. We also have E2B R3 regional requirements for combo products that we discussed in that meeting. And then we had CDER's update on their vaccine reporting. And finally, there was a sponsor who actually came and presented about their experience in implementing E2B R3 with a regulator, which is again very interesting, which I would recommend that you see in that video. All right. So with all the background and FAERS II E2B R3, I would now just make it a little interesting to put in a question as to what are the methods of submitting ICSRs to FAERS by sponsors. So there are 4 options, and we will wait for your answers. All right, so the correct answer here is going to be D, which is A and B, because it's by the sponsor. So you have this electronic submission gateway and safety reporting portal. Do remember, MedWatch Online is only for consumer and healthcare professional reporting, which is the voluntary reporting mechanism. All right. So getting into the regional elements, I think this is where everybody on this webinar is going to be very interested in knowing what are these all regional elements. So let's start talking about these regional elements, where you will see the slides which will come in the future slides. There are 2 types. One is E2B R3 regional elements. When I say new, so these are the new regional elements added, about 24 elements. And then we will talk about the elements, those are the updates. So, excuse me, these are all elements which are existing ICH elements, and they have a slightly different business rule. And there are about 20 elements that has that kind of update. So these are all core elements with slight different business rules. So let's start with the new elements. So what are the new elements, the 24 elements I've been talking about? First is in the area of identification of case safety report, where we have an element called the local criteria report type. The local criteria report type is the type of report which is the 15-day, the 7-day, 5-day, 30-day, and so on and so forth. So these will, in R2, if you look at it, it was using the field called the expedited or non-expedited, which was, did it fulfill the expedited criteria, and we were reusing that field for this purpose. In R3 now it's become its own its own element, independent element. Next we have combination product flag. It's only used for post-market. and this indicates if the report is about a combination product. Now, if you notice here, this numbers actually has a prefix of FDA dot, which means that these are the regional elements that FDA is putting in their specification. Next is primary source of information, which is the reporter's email, and there is one new element. Now, before I go to the next element, I also want to mention that all the elements we're going to go through, especially all the new elements, has been harmonized with an activity was conducted to harmonize that with all the elements for CDER for vaccine. Of course, CDER has more elements than what is needed for drugs and therapeutic biologics. But whatever is needed for drugs and therapeutic biologics in FAERS have all been harmonized with the big set of elements that CDER has for vaccines. Okay, this is a very new element which we call under study identification, and very important element for pre-market safety reporting. The three elements here, the first one is IND number where the AE adverse event occurred. So this is an element which is where you would submit the IND number as just a number for the IND on which the adverse event actually occurred. And then the next element is for the cross-reported INDs. Now these is where we're just asking for the number only, because this field already says it's IND, so we are expecting a IND number there. Typically you would have seen that we ask for a prefix with the application type and then the application number. In this case, since we are saying the field name is IND, you will be sending us a number. And then the third element is the pre-ANDA number where the adverse event occurs. This is for the BA/BE trials, where you would be submitting the pre-ANDA number, which I think is going to be somewhere where you would have to apply for that number, which typically is a pre-ANDA number, and the same number eventually becomes the ANDA number. And that was discussed in that video in the second meeting, which was part of the prerequisites. Next few elements, data patient characteristics, have patient race and ethnicity. Race is a repeatable field, ethnicity is just one value. All right, reaction event, this has one field which is required intervention among all the death, life-threatening, and hospitalization, and this is a new element which we capture on the MedWatch, but was not there in E2B. Next, we go into device information. Device information, if you look here, the number of elements which we are capturing is not that many number of elements, and again we have tried to also match that up with CDER for their vaccine on combination products. So device information is mostly used for our combination products. So if you had combination product flag as yes, that we saw in 2 slides back, then in that case you have to come here and fill in whatever information is available to you. So if it was malfunction, it was truly a malfunction that caused an adverse event, or it was just a pure malfunction, then that malfunction data point is used. If you had a follow-up, what type of follow-up, that is again a repeatable tag. So now you have the drug which can be repeated. Within drug, now you have the device that can be repeated, and within the device you have this flag called initial, if follow-up, what type of follow-up, that is also becomes a repeatable field. Then you have the device problem code. You can have one or more device problem code for a device. You have the brand name, you have the common device name, and the device product code. In this, the rule is that at least give us the device brand name or the common device name. If you have none, then you give us the device product code. But once you know the device product code, you typically would know the common device name. So give us the common one of them. And if you don't have the last two, device brand name or the common device name, then give us the device product code. All right. Going next into device information is you have the device manufacturer, and we will look about what the fields are under the device manufacturer in the next slide. Device usage, device lot number, operator of the device, and remedial action. So these are basically the fields that we have for devices. Now within the device manufacturer, what do we have? We have the manufacturer name, address, city, state, and country. So these are basically, if you add it up, it comes to around 24 data elements. So these are data elements that are new data elements in R3, which are regional elements. Now going into the elements which are for update, which have been updated. So we already have a core data element in ICH called batch sender identifier, and we are saying to use the identifier as the DUNS number. The batch receiver identifier, here is we're talking about the batch receiver, so it's the batch, and in the batch we are saying for post-market to use what we use today, which is for the test we use ZZFDA TST and ZZFDA for production, and pre-market we are saying to use ZZFDA TST pre-market, so we're just adding a postfix of underscore pre-MKT for pre-market. Now, within that, the message receive identifier, within that batch, you have the message. So for post-market, you have CDER. For pre-market IND, we are saying to use the CDER pre-market, and for CBER IND, to use the CBER pre-market. This is the idea of having this is this actually helps us to route the report appropriately to the right center who are going to be reviewing the safety reports. Next, case identification. Did the case fulfill the expected criteria? The only change here is that does not support the use of null flavor NI. So every report we are expecting to have the value of true or false, that it's expedited or non-expedited. This is a very important part of identifying initial follow-up reports, which is linking of initial and follow-up. This is where FDA uses the safety report unique identifier to connect the reports for the initial and follow-up. So you have to make sure that the reports are updated, have the right safety report unique identifier in order to connect the initial and follow-ups. Now, we do have an exception, and you will see in the guidance and the other technical specification in both R2 and R3, where we say that if you truly want to convert everything into the ICH format for the safety report ID, then you need to connect to FAERS ESUP at fda.hhs.gov, where we can work with you to make sure that if these data value needs to be updated to the new value, we are able to do that in our system first, and then you could submit from that point onwards the new safety report ID, which we don't recommend, but there are situations where a company just had to move to the new format which ICH recommends. All right, next area, section C with type of report. So this is very important for pre-market report. Use to report from study. Include documents. So this is one data element where compression is not used for US reporting and encoding is limited to B64. Source of case identifier. FDA will provide the warning, will provide a warning but do not reject if C191 is true and C191R1 is not provided. And for case identifiers, this is FDA will provide a warning again based on C191 is true and C191R1 is not provided. All right. Again with section C, person responsible, element under C33 are mandatory. So this is who is sending the sender of the report. Patient characteristics. This is important to know because there are certain values based on which we identify, what this report is about. One is that especially for medication error and compounding, use a null flavor when no patient is involved. For combination product, if it's a single report, for malfunction, that means there are no patient involved, the element value should be none. For combination product, if we have multiple malfunction but no patient involved with no adverse event, so that means no patient involved, then it should be summary. And then for aggregate IND safety reports, the element value must be aggregate. Now, there's one thing we are talking about, especially for combination product, if we can just use that null flavor and just make it as one rule rather than two separate rules. Patient characteristics, date of death. This is one conditional mandatory. If outcome attributed to the adverse event is death, then that date is required. Moving into drugs, these are some rules which we talk about in the post-marketing side, and it's important that this is followed for the post-market side, and we so that the appropriate information comes in, and we are able to code them through our product dictionary that we have. All right, drug informative characteristics. So for pre-market, use 1 for suspect, 2 concomitant. Pharmaceutical dosage form, we have for R2, we still accept the European Medicine Agency's dosage codes or text, and R3 is EDQM. And for pre-market is a CDER dosage form code list. This is something we are still discussing, which we may end up in using just R3 EDQM. But definitely for post-market, it is the R3 EDQM codes to be used. When we go into next element, which is the application number, so this rule is typically there in R2 today, so it just continues with R3. There's no difference here. All right, source of assessment. So these are some of the data points that especially for pre-market safety reports, it's very important. And if report from study, then you need to report this, and the sponsor is required. That means the assessment is by the sponsor. Then you have the method of assessment, which is again conditional mandatory based on that it's report from study. And finally, we have results of assessment, which is again conditional mandatory based on the report type, which is report that is the C13, where the type is report from study. Among with the data elements, I think this is almost the second last one, where we have additional information on drugs, which is GK10R, which is repeatable. Now, these are some specialized terms that we want to use in post-market, combination, and compounding, where we already have some set of values for ICH, and these are some additional values that we are putting as regional elements to clearly identify the products and the type of product. And last but not least is the acknowledgement, so that this acknowledgement kind of comes back to you, and these values kind of determine what report it is as the message identify that you had sent. It sends back with this, and so you are able to identify and update your case with the acknowledgement with the values that has been sent back to you. All right. We talked about many data elements, so I'm not going to quiz you on every data element. I think that will take another 2 hours. So what we want to do is just 2 simple things which are important. So one of the question here is all regional data elements are identified the prefix of FDA, and the answer is true. So every regional elements is prefixed by FDA. Next. So compression is used for US reporting and encoding is limited to B64. And the answer is true. No, my mistake. The answer is false because compression is not used for US reporting. Okay, and its encoding is limited to 64B. So the answer is false. Sorry. That was a tricky question. All right. Next item which we had in our agenda was to go over the routing mechanism, because this is, I think, very important for the sponsors to know how we're going to do the routing mechanism. This is a simple flow of data. We have the industry, so sponsor, who can submit through the safety reporting portal or submit through the gateway, through an E2B R3. It comes to the gateway, goes into the FAERS, and then we get into analytics. So here acknowledgement stands for ACT stands for the acknowledgement, FAERS is the FAERS system, and then we have SRP, which is the safety reporting portal. So the current mechanism is we have the trading partners, E2B R2 comes in, we have the web trader, we have the safety reporting portal, they go into this ESG, which is the electronic submission gateway, and then it goes to the appropriate FAERS module and resides in FAERS. What we are talking about here now is the change. So what is the trading partner change which is going to happen here? So you have the trading partner, you have the ESG gateway, and the post-market, there are two methods, right, today, which is the AS2 header method or the routing IDs, and you know with that you have the AIRS and the AIRS attachment, and the routing ID is FDA AIRS and FDA AIRS attachment. One is for the XML and attachment is for the attachment. When we go into doing pre-market, we are putting in a separate path for doing pre-market report. And in there we have AIRS pre-market, and we have the AIRS attachment pre-market. And then for the routing ID, as you see that you have the FDA AIRS pre-market and the attachment. So one important thing to note that when we go to R3, we probably won't need that attachment, because in R3 attachment is embedded within the XML. So as a result, that probably won't be needed, but definitely for R2, we will have to continue to use it in that fashion, use these headers and routing IDs for the attachment. So with that, let's go into some trivia questions. Attachment must be submitted using the routing ID when moved to E2B R3. So the FDA AIRS attachment pre-market. So the answer is, and the answer is false, because when you move to R3, attachments become embedded. So you don't need that routing ID for submitting your attachments. It is only applicable when you're submitting in R2. All right, so the final area of discussion here is testing plan, where everybody would be interested in how we are going to do testing plan. And let's go into some of the areas of testing plan. So this is very important for you all to note. There's no compliance date defined for R3 submission. Sponsors can start testing after March 2020. FDA to provide a validator to pre-test senders ICSR, and validator can be accessed by the URL. So this is what we are tentative on having this validator available right after March 2020, where you could start testing using that validator. Once validated, sponsors can submit the ICSRs in a pre-production environment and receive acknowledgement. So this will be the test environment to submit. And sponsors will continue to submit ICSRs in R2 format until R3 is ready. So once you are ready with R3, you can submit starting with R3. When you do this testing, there will be two routing IDs, so will be available for pre and post market. will be available in a pre-production environment, like a test environment. So you should be able to submit through those routing IDs or those routing mechanisms. We recommend that a sponsor must test both pre and post market, including combo products, in the R3 format using both routing mechanisms. And sponsors must notify FDA when ready for the first, production submission to FDA in R3 format, so that we can monitor and make sure that they all were successful. Because R3 is something we're going to do. We are going to do for the first time. So. And in future, we plan to conduct a cross-regional testing so that we try to make sure that the different versions of E2Bs that come to us, we are able to accept that and not reject the XML files. And finally, all questions during testing must be sent to eprompt@fda.hhs.gov. And after this webinar, if you have any questions which we are not able to answer during this Q&A session, please do send those questions to eprompt@fda.hhs.gov. Finally, let me summarize what we went over with the webinar today. We talked about FAERS II, E2B R3 upversioning plans, the objective, scope, timelines. We went over all the elements, 24 elements which were new elements, and about 25 I think were elements that had some level of update. We communicated the different routing mechanisms by ESG or safety reporting portal, and finally we talked about some of the test methods for testing your ICH E2B R3 regional XMLs. So with that, we are open for Q&A, which we will begin. We're going to start the Q&A shortly, and so you have some time to type in your questions, and we will get back. All right, Suranjan Day here again. We are back, and we will be now answering some of your questions that you have posted. So first, I want to give it over for IND safety reporting, and Meredith will introduce herself and answer the questions related to IND safety reporting.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Meredith Chuck. I'm the Acting Associate Director for Safety in the Office of Hematology Oncology Products here at CDER. And I'll be taking care of some of the IND safety reporting related questions. And the first one that came in is for IND safety reports. Until when will the paper MedWatch reports be accepted? So this new requirement is for sponsors of commercial INDs only. And so the requirement to submit to FAERS and no longer use the MedWatch reports will be 2 years after the publication of the final guidance. So until the 2 years after the final guidance, we will accept MedWatch forms for all types of INDs, commercial and non-commercial, although we do encourage sponsors highly as soon as they're ready to start submitting to FAERS, either via the ESG or the Safety Reporting Portal, to do that as soon as possible. And the other one had related to timing for the voluntary submissions of IND safety reports. Again, we don't have an implementation date for that, but rest assured there will be plenty of communication surrounding that new process change. I'm going to hand things over back to Suranjan.
Yes. So before I answer some of the other questions, I want to introduce TJ, who's going to introduce himself and answer some of the other questions which we have.
Hello, this is TJ Chen, CDER Office of Strategic Program. I'm here just to answer one technical question concerning is FDA working with a software vendor to update DTD profile for E2B R3 with a local elements? Actually, we're not. The R3 is HL7 schema. We are working that internally, and then we vet it with HL7 expert for the element to make sure it's correctly using the right XPath. That's pretty much my answer to that. Well, there's another question about will no flavor be acceptable if the date of death is unknown? The answer is yes. I mean, even though the requirement for IND safety report, if there's a death, you need to provide a date. If it's truly unknown, you can put a no flavor to begin with, and then of course we will discover that after the follow-up report. And with that, I'm going to return to Suranjan.
All right, so I'm back again. So let's go into some of the questions where we have so is required intervention a new seriousness criteria? No, it is not a new seriousness criteria. This is, if you look at the MedWatch form, the MedWatch form always had this required intervention. So we are just getting that into the R3 element. I think this required intervention mostly is used when we are talking with medication errors. So that's why that field's there. Is ICSR combo product, ICSR for combo product is submitted using FDA 3500A, correct? ICSR for combo product currently, yes, is submitted through 3500A because the date where you have to comply is, I think, is July 2020. So by that time, all the sponsor, mandatory submitter must submit either through safety reporting portal or via the gateway. All right, next question is application number mandatory in R2 as well as in R3? See, there are two fields here. One is the application number. If you're talking about this application number, this is the number under the drug level. Please, we do not want folks to get confused with the data point which is under study, where the IND number and the pre-ANDA number. So this application number, I'm assuming, is whoever asked the question is under drugs. This field is not mandatory because there are situations where you may have a generic product and you may not know if it is truly your product, so you may not know the application number. So application number field is not mandatory. What it means by use both routing mechanism on the first bullet on the testing plan. When we talk about use both routing mechanism, where I talk about the pre and post market. So if you have a pre-market ICSR or if you have a post-market ICSR, we would like you to transmit that ICSR through both the routes so that you have tested both the routing mechanisms. All right. When will R3 format be required? The R3 format, there are no date that has been put for R3 format, and I think on the testing slides I had mentioned that no compliance date has been defined for the R3 submission. All right. Next is can we test R3 via gateway or should we load up XML file? Yes, you can definitely test it via gateway. The idea behind doing through the URL or the validator which we are giving is pretty much to first make sure that you have tested your structure and your data in those XML files, and next you will then test submitting the XML file through the different routing mechanisms. So that kind of shows the whole integration and the completeness of all your submissions. All right. How long post R3 implementation with FDA support R2? We have still not made any decisions on this, how long we are going to be supporting. For now, until we say anything, we continue to support R2. As I said, we'll be supporting a lower version of a standard. Another question which we have here is FDA going to move away from DUNS in favor of new unique entity identifier? I think DUNS number, what we're talking about is for the resender identifier, which was this batch identifier. We would request to still continue doing the DUNS number. Okay. Now, is ProCode mandatory if brand or common device name is provided? So no. If you have provided a brand or a common device name, you don't have to provide a ProCode. So if you don't have any of one of those, if you had a brand name, then you just submit with the brand name. If you have a common device name, then just submit with a common device name. And if you have none, then please use the ProCode to submit. All right. I am getting... Let me...
We'll be right back in just a couple moments with additional questions.
Hello again, this is Meredith Chuck. I'm going to circle back around to a couple of IND safety reporting questions. One of the questions is for IND safety reports, should they be submitted in R2 or R3? And the answer is that we will begin implementation in R2. And again, that information will be provided and there'll be plenty of notice about those technical specifications and the guidance publication as well. Another question, is it possible to see a sample report? And yes, we do plan to put some sample XML files on the website that do take care of a lot of the case scenarios for IND safety reporting. So those will be available, and again, notification will be given. And the other question for IND safety reports relates to how would a non-clinical IND safety report be submitted since there's no patient identifier. That's a great question because actually only IND safety reports for individual patient level data or aggregate reports will be required. And that is aligning with the 31232 requirements for IND safety reporting, and all of that will be made very clear in the guidance and technical specification documents that will be published soon.
All right. So I'm back again. So there's another question is in R3 for post-market drugs, if AEs are found in literature article, will it be mandatory to attach the literature article? If so, how that will be handled? The process is still the same. You know what you do today. There's no change in the regulation or no change in the guidance. It's the method of submission is changing in R3, which means that you are embedding that article into the XML and then submitting the XML file. Okay, so here's another question which we have. Will the test cases for R3 be provided by FDA, or do sponsors need to create the test XML files? FDA will provide some sample files, but to truly test your data, you need to create your files and then submit them and verify them that they work. The sample files are more a guidance for you so that you know what and how the structure and how the format of the files would look like. So, and I think another one which I have is, okay. So here I've mentioned, okay, here you have mentioned only how sponsors can submit. How about third-party service providers? You know, today there are third-party service providers where you have CROs who are submitting reports through safety reporting portal, or they have an ESG account. The method of submission where, you know, so how do you submit an R3? I mean, these are the same concept. The concepts are nothing different. If there is a CRO who wants to submit the report, the way they are submitting the report through the gateway, they will be submitting through the gateway. If they're submitting through the safety reporting portal, they will submit through that. Through the gateway, now they will have the two routes for pre-market and post-market for R2, and the same two routes will be used for R3. Do I have any?
Hello again, this is Meredith Chuck. I just want to let everyone know that the topic of IND safety reporting is quite a big one, and there's a lot of information to cover. So I'd like to invite everyone to join us back on November 1st. We'll actually be having a dedicated SBIA webinar focused exclusively on IND safety reporting. So if you have additional questions, I invite you to join us and participate in that as well.
Hello, this is TJ again. Let's a follow-up question concerning the required data element, mainly in the death report. The question is about if it's mandatory and the date is truly unknown. How do you deal with the data element? So in the ICH E2B guidance, there's a section talk about no flavor, And you can also reference to HL7v3 message. The idea is if you don't have the required value for the data element, you leave the value blank. And then you populate an attribute called no flavor with certain so-called flavor, like unknown or no information. So that's a kind of general question to the mandatory data element.
So with that, we are time's up with our question and answers. If you have more questions, please do now send it to the eprompt@fda.hhss.gov. And then now we have our closeout. And
thank you to our speaker for your very informative and timely talk, and to our panel for responding to the questions that came in. A few closing reminders. I want to share again how to claim continuing education for physicians, pharmacists, and nurses. Instructions on how to claim your continuing education will be sent to you via email from CDER SBIA at fda.hhs.gov. Please note, you have 14 days to claim your CE and attest to your attendance. This activity is also eligible for continuing education by SOCRA, RAPS, SQA, and ACRP. Please refer to our website at fda.gov/CDER SBIA for more details. You'll be able to obtain the attendance certificate only upon completion of the survey, which will remain open for 2 weeks. Let us know your comments and feedback via the survey. This will provide us with ideas for future improvements. For questions that were not answered, please resend to eprompt@fda.hhs.gov. On behalf of CDER Small Business and Industry Assistance, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation and found it helpful. We look forward to your presence at future webinars, which will be advertised on our website at fda.gov/CDER SBIA webinars. Thank you.